Welcome to Keep Going, a podcast about failure and success, hosted by John Biggs. Every week, we talk to an amazing person about a time they failed and what they learned. And remember, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Welcome back to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. I'm John Biggs. Today on the show, we have Michael Cecchi. He's a self-described human, but I would describe him as a author, a restaurateur, a really cool guy. I've been to your restaurant multiple times, Michael. Thank you for joining us. This is a real treat for me.
Thanks, John. This is a treat for me too. It's good to be here with you.
Yeah. So you wrote the book a couple years ago. Your Table is Ready. One of my favorites. I tell people it's basically on par with Bourdain stuff in giving you that inside look. Well, it's well written as well, but giving you that inside look on into the restaurant business, which has a lot of ups and downs. Obviously, you have a new restaurant, Cecchi's, in 14th Street, I guess, 15th, 13th. Yeah, perfect. Which is going gangbusters. So I wanted you to tell us some stories from those days, maybe from the book, maybe from building this restaurant. I don't think you've had a failure yet with this restaurant, hopefully, but if you have something you can share.
Well, with this restaurant, no. But in terms of a human, I've had many failures. Honestly, without those failures, I don't think I'd be who I am. Nothing goes the way you want all the time. And if it did, I don't think you'd be living on this planet because things get screwed up every now and again. I wrote a book. It's a front of house kitchen confidential. So you're correct. Mm-hmm. It has a lot to do with Bourdain. I worked with Bourdain briefly many years ago. And he was a beast, and knew him from restaurant world as well. But he eventually became this, iconic human being. Mm-hmm. So I thought that people needed to know about what the front of house was like. And I've been doing it for almost 40 years and lots of stories to tell, lots of ups and downs, failures in the restaurant world. And in restaurants, I think in New York, 60% go out of business in 3 years. The rest go out in 5 years, 90-something percent. So it's a business predicated upon failure. And people ask me, they say, well, would you give me some advice? I'm thinking of opening up a restaurant. Will you consult? I said, sure. I'll say, take the money you're about to invest, convert it to cash, go to the roof of the building the restaurant's going to be in, throw the cash off the roof. You'll save yourself 5 years of misery. You'll probably lose less now, and perhaps someone down below who needs the money will get it. It's a brutal business. And it's also an amazingly incredible business. There's nothing like it, at least for me. And I think, the pandemic brought home how important restaurants were to the fabric of just our society, especially in the big cities. Restaurants have become the town halls, the piazzas, places where people go to celebrate a birthday, an anniversary, to find a date, to go on a date, etc. And it's the human contact that we all crave. We're social beings. And, the pandemic really hit home with people sitting outside in New York City anyway, in 20-degree weather, because they wanted both to support their restaurant so it wouldn't go out of business and perhaps see a few other people freezing to death and get a cold meal. To go through those extremes, it shows really I think the importance and the relevance of what we in the restaurant world do to everyone else. Everyone else. We're part of this fabric of society that's quite necessary. And my book talks about that. It talks about the stories, both good and bad, customers, the staff, the ups and downs, the crazy chefs, the crazy guests, and some of the most beautiful people in the world.
How do you know when a restaurant's going to be successful? Let's say you're working front of house, and you're looking for that vibe, whether to join or something like that. How do you know that this is the place to stay at, to go, or do you even care about that?
Oh, of course you care about it. If you're an employee and you need a job, you want that restaurant to succeed. If anyone knew what makes a restaurant successful, there'd be lots of billionaires out there and they'd all be successful. The track record shows that that's really not the case. A successful restaurant is an alchemy of many different things. It's of course the food. It's of course the service. But what I tell my staff here at my restaurant, and we've been very successful, thank God. It's been just over a year, and we seem to be doing very well. But we don't sell food. We're not selling service. We sell an experience. And for me to be successful, for the restaurant to be successful, once a guest walks through that door, we're on 13th Street. They need to walk through our transom, come through the door, and feel like 13th Street is done. That the lousy cab ride they had, or the argument with their boss or your wife that you just had, all of a sudden that's gone, and you walk in there in the restaurant, and whether consciously or unconsciously, there's something different. And if it's successful, it's a very, very good feeling. And that's where the alchemy begins to come in. It's the person who's standing at the front of the door who's greeting you. And if it's not with a big smile and a welcome, things are going to go south very quickly. The bar is usually right near the door. And if the bartenders have turned around and they're picking their nose or on their cell phones and not there to greet you as well or give you a smile, there's a problem. If you sit down and you're not getting getting your drink within, say, 5 to 7 minutes, or at least in 2 minutes, someone coming over to greet you, there's a problem. And all of those elements are not about food. They're about the experience of you coming in the door. And then you want to back that up with great lighting, the music not too loud, it's all these disparate elements that have to come together to make the whole of what the restaurant is. So when you're going into a restaurant, or if you're a gun for hire and you're there, you kind of know from the beginning. You know what the ethos is of the company, of the person who has it. Is it a good-looking place? Is the menu people taking care of it? Does the chef care? Are you tasting things? Are you learning steps of service? All of that. When all of that comes together, you probably have a pretty good chance of being somewhat successful. Mm-hmm. You then need to continue that, and that's the hardest part, is getting something that from the get-go that maybe gets a lot of publicity. It's a known chef, it's a known owner, which is great. But everyone has failures, and restaurants, there are quite a few. But you kind of know, you get the feeling of it. And then the hardest thing is to sustain it. And sustaining it means someone, whether with a proprietary interest or the proprietor, needs to be there. And here in this restaurant, every day, I'm here most of it, 5 or 6 days a week. But every day we talk about the details of what we do. And in restaurant, the details is a plenitude of them, to your glassware, your silverware, are the tables set properly, are the reservations taken properly, all these things. It's got to be right. And if no one's in charge of that or on top of it on a daily basis, your chance of success are not very good. Mm-hmm. Because people know it. People know when they walk in the door when things are off. Hence, I think the big failure rate,
How much of this is expandable into just like a general business sense? I'm not talking about like a retail store even. I'm talking about like a web shop or something like that. Do you think your skills could translate well to that? I guess this focus on the minutia.
Yeah, I think if you can work in a restaurant and you're successful, you can pretty much do anything. To go through what my servers go through, or the guys in the kitchen go through on a daily basis, the long hours, greeting a multitude of people, some wonderful, some horrible, all of them needing something from you. If you can produce on that level of a somewhat sustainable and successful level, what can't you do? I talk about this a lot. People come in and they say, I had a woman in last night. We're talking about hiring someone. I need to hire a manager. And she says, I look at people's resumes, and if someone's been in the service industry, I'm definitely going to give them a second look, because I know that they've been through a lot to get where they are, to do that. So I think the skills you acquire here, it's a multitude of them. And most importantly, the people skills. If you can talk to someone, make someone at least somewhat happy, if not thrilled, to be in your restaurant. If you're the server, how many times you go to a restaurant and you've got this amazing server? You're like so happy. How many times have you got the worst server in the world? So it's if you can succeed in this, I really think it translates into anything you can do.
Tell me a story about a time you did fail, or the restaurant you're at was failed. What did it feel like? What was the downward spiral?
Oh, it sucks. I've been lucky, I've been lucky enough to be relatively successful in this, and I think I kept out a couple of the bad ones in the
Okay.
book. But there was a restaurant. I was desperate for a job. I had taken a couple of years off. My older daughter was born, and I said, you know what, I need a break. I was at Raoul's restaurant so for about 17 years, and I was just cooked. I was done. So I took a couple of years off, and after that, I was desperate for a job. And it was at the point where, even though I have this pretty stellar resume, I couldn't get hired. It was just like no one cared about me or my resume, or I get an interview and it was these 20 somethings interviewing a guy in his 40s for a restaurant job, and they barely gave me a second look despite my experience. And I stumbled on a restaurant that was opening in the West Village, and it turns out I knew the owner. She had been a customer of mine at another restaurant I'd worked at, and I'm in there, and she was opening a steakhouse. And I looked around. This is in the Village, and there weren't many steakhouses, if any, in the Village at the time. And I looked around, and the space is okay. It's a good space. She's opening in a month, and I figure, well, it was the old furniture from the old restaurant, and things really weren't, spruced up. And I thought, oh, the furniture's probably arriving, and things will be changing. And the furniture never arrived. Because there's no furniture coming. And one of the things, the kiss of death in the restaurant world, is once a restaurant goes out of business, it's almost impossible to resurrect what was in that space using the furnishings of that space. You got to start from scratch. You got to gut the thing, or at least take everything out. That didn't happen. Then she introduced me to the chef. Well, there weren't one chef, there were two chefs. And I was like, well, why are there two chefs? Well, I like both of them, and I think they'll complement each other. So, restaurant, the margins are tiny. A chef's salary is pretty steep. And to have two chef's salaries in a restaurant where you probably can't afford new furniture, you're in trouble.
Okay.
And I realized that the staff she had hired was a bunch of whoa. I mean, how do you describe this? In the business, you're in the business long enough. There were a lot of servers who've stayed in it that probably should have left a long time ago, and they managed to survive. And they worked 5-6 restaurants, and it was a group of misfits, for lack of nice people, but misfits. And I realized this is not going to last. If this lasts, we're in deep trouble. It lasted about 6 months. I left after 2 months because there was just no business. But two of the servers, the first night, were so drunk they couldn't wait on their tables. The two chefs hated each other. The food that came out was mediocre. And there I am, and beginning to start to see people that I knew from the business. I thought, oh, this is the kiss of death. This is really, really bad. And so that was just awful. Terrible experience. You're so embarrassed to serve a drink or to serve the food there in this environment that was tanking. But I needed a paycheck.
Yeah. Well, it almost seems like being a session musician, right? If you hate the band that you're in, and it's just a mess, you're gonna perform poorly. It sounds like. Well, I mean, you wouldn't perform poorly, but I think the general vibe would kind of go down and
It goes
destroy the
down. Yeah.
place.
Look, you could be the best, the best bass player, but
Yeah.
if the people that surround you suck, you're in trouble. It's not going to happen. So restaurants are like that. I was also an actor. I had an acting career for 25 years. And so you fail maybe 99% of the time in all the auditions that you do. And it's a constant bout of rejection over and over. I managed to be relatively, did a lot of plays. That's really what I wanted to do. And when my older daughter was born, decided to create a film company. And we started a film company. We, me, two of my classmates from Harvard, we wrote a short film that was successful and opened the New York Film Festival, which was great. We did 2 other shorts that were well received. And then we did a feature. This is back in 2007, I think it was. We did a feature film. I raised the money for it, produced it. We based it on the old independent film model of the 90s, early 2000s, where you try to win some film festivals, get small distribution, go to DVD, sell some DVDs, raise the money for the next film. So we do that. The film it was called The Brooklyn Heist, won some festivals. We get distribution. We get a small distribution in New York and LA, a couple-week run. We get picked up for DVD release. We send thousands of DVDs to Blockbuster, thousands to Hollywood Video, so East and West Coast. Within a month, the economy crashed and both those places went bankrupt.
Yep.
So we lost everything. So talk about, you're trying to retool yourself, go from theater to film, because some people make money in film, and we lost it all. It was a disaster. It took me 4 years to go see another film.
God.
Yeah. But that also allowed me to embrace the restaurant world that I knew very well full time. And it became really an extraordinary trajectory that got me to write a book. It got to be my restaurant. So out of that, that Pyrrhic failure, you rise from the ashes, or you try to pivot. And I don't know.
That's a fascinating point. So the concept there is that you had created you'd create an alternative life for yourself that you imagined. I mean, it was basically your 2 tracks essentially, and we could argue that performances in both of them, being front of house and being on stage, is essentially the same kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Except in one, you're throwing a pizza at somebody's face at some point, meaning that's the Chekhov play. But this idea that, okay, I did everything I could with this other career up to the point of going into film, I guess. Yeah. And that destruction forced you to clarify your vision for the restaurant world. That's what it sounds like happened. I'm not sure if that's really what happened.
Yeah, restaurants supported my theater habit. I'd leave town to do a show for 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, and you're doing theater. You're making just enough money to tread water. You're coming back to New York with no money, and I was lucky enough to have very good restaurant jobs, really good restaurants. I was good at it. I was a good waiter. I liked waiting tables. I was a really good maitre d'. I was a good manager. Well, that happened after the career. But I was good at it. I loved it because that was the theater. I got to meet all these wonderful people for the most part, and you're on stage every single night. And they're giving you money. They're giving you more money than you'll get in your paycheck after that week run in Illinois. And so it's lucrative, but you still want to be an actor. And so you go out and then you leave here maybe making $2,000 a week in the restaurant to go make $350 a week in the theater, because that's where your heart is and where your passion is. So when that didn't work, or I couldn't do it anymore, I couldn't leave town for 6 months, a year, because I had a newborn, I pivoted, and the pivot was successful till it wasn't. Okay. And it was a debacle, Look, in my life, I've gone bankrupt twice for various reasons. But you bounce back.
What's the best advice to bounce back? A lot of people will hit a repressive like wall essentially. And how did you get over those?
Well, you could wallow in that depression. You can do that. And I think it's probably healthy to do it for a bit. You got to let those feelings out. Like I said, I couldn't go see a film for 4 years, but also I needed to make a living, and so you pick yourself up, and then what are the choices? I was successful in restaurants. So I did that. And actually I became a restaurant manager for the first time. And it was one of the worst jobs I ever had. I was there for 6 months. But when I was there, a customer that I used to have came in and presented me with an opportunity to become a partner in another restaurant. And that worked that way. But you just got to keep going, I'm sorry, one foot in front of the other. Everybody fails. And what everybody does. And if they don't, they're full of shit, because you're failing on something at some point in your life. But that's the learning, That's those low points that you get to. Well, how do you come out of that? And a lot of it's self-preservation. A lot of it, you look at your family. You want to feed that family, and you think, well, what am I good at? What can I do? And rely on that inner humanity, because people will give you a chance. If you just go out and do it. If you're depressed and miserable, it's not going to happen. You got to go. You got to keep moving, man. You got to.
Michael, this has been beautiful. I want everybody to go to the restaurant and pick up the Happy Meal. That's one of my favorite things, which is a vodka martini and a bunch of your good French fries.
Yeah, $25, 5 to 6.
It's fine. But I came in last time I was there. I think I came in a little too late, but they still gave me the deal.
Well, that person. Let me go talk to them.
Yeah. Like I get it was your British bartender. I didn't catch his name, but
he's Welsh. Don't let him know.
Welsh.
Oh
British. God, I'm sorry. Well, if you want to go hassle him, feel free.
I'll always hassle him. He's a great guy. He's a wonderful bartender. I have a great staff here. I'm blessed.
Excellent. Yeah, it's one of my favorite places in New York. Thank you for joining us. This has been amazing.
Thanks, John. Great to talk to you, and hope to see you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been Keep Going. I'm John Biggs. We'll see you next week.
Cheers.
I was so lost, pacing back and forth for 27